What would you do if war broke out tomorrow? If the power went out, internet crashed, and food disappeared from market shelves? Well, the European Union is now telling its 450 million citizens to be ready for exactly that. A new directive from Brussels urges Europeans to stockpile food, water, and emergency supplies for at least 72 hours. The reason? A dangerous mix of rising geopolitical tensions, the war in Ukraine, sabotage threats, and cyber warfare. But aside from Germany, no other European country has a real war preparedness plan. And with a weary, distant, and disinterested Washington, many believe Europe won't stand a chance in such a scenario. So is this a wake-up call for Europe or a chilling sign of what's to come? Hello and welcome. You're watching Statecraft with me, Geeta Mohan. In an 18-page emergency preparedness document, the European Commission has urged its citizens to be ready for crisis, whether it's war, cyber attacks, or sabotage. The message is clear. Europe is no longer as safe as it once was. EU Commission President Ursula von der Leyen called for a new culture of resilience, a shift in mindset that would prepare everyday Europeans for potential disruptions. But disruptions caused by what exactly?
We're living in the most momentous and dangerous of times. I do not need to describe the grave nature of the threats that we face or the devastating consequences that we will have to endure if those threats would come to pass, because the question is no longer whether Europe's security is threatened in a very real way, or whether Europe should shoulder more of its responsibility for its own security. In truth, we have long known the answers to those questions. The real question in front of us is whether Europe is prepared to act as decisively as the situation dictates, and whether Europe is ready and able to act with speed and with the ambition that is needed. We are in an era of rearmament, and Europe is ready to massively boost its defence spending, both to respond to the short-term urgency to act and to support Ukraine, but also to address the long-term need to take on more responsibility for our own European security. Europe is ready to assume its responsibilities. Rearm Europe could mobilize close to 800 billion euros of defence expenditures for a safe and resilient Europe. We will, of course, continue working closely with our partners in NATO. This is a moment for Europe, and we are ready to step up.
The document highlights several growing threats: Russia's ongoing war in Ukraine, sabotage of key infrastructure, mainly gas pipelines and undersea cables, electronic and cyber warfare, potential large-scale power grid failures, and rising global tensions, including NATO's uncertain future. The European War Plan encourages European citizens to take personal responsibility in case of extreme disruptions, especially in the crucial first 72 hours of a crisis. But this raises a big question. Is the EU subtly telling its citizens that war is coming? This in itself is unprecedented. Now, if we look at the given scenario, if war or a major disaster struck today, only one country in Europe is even remotely prepared. That country is Germany. Last year, Germany updated its national defense framework, a move seen as direct preparation for a possible military conflict. German Interior Minister Nancy Faeser made it clear Germany must be ready for conflict, and that means preparation at every level of society. But across the rest of Europe, there's little to no war readiness at all. France, no national stockpiling program. Spain, no war contingency plan for civilians. Italy, focused more on climate disasters than war scenarios. And Eastern Europe, military-focused but lacking civil preparedness. Last year in November, Nordic countries, namely Sweden, Finland and Norway, did distribute leaflets urging its citizens to be prepared for war. But the military might and disaster capability of these countries are in question. All in all, there is no unified war readiness plan across the continent. And no one is at fault for this except Europe itself. You see, for decades, Europe has relied on the United States of America and NATO for protection. But Washington's stance is shifting. As Trump administration is done with doing favors, he has repeatedly said that European nations must start defending themselves instead of depending on America's military power. In fact, the Vice President of America was condescending, almost denigrating Europe in the stance Europe took in the past and the way America has had to come out and defend Europe.
The threat that I worry the most about vis-a-vis Europe is not Russia, it's not China, it's not any other external actor. And what I worry about is the threat from within, the retreat of Europe from some of its most fundamental values, values shared with the United States of America. In Britain and across Europe, free speech, I fear, is in retreat. In Washington, there is a new sheriff in town, and under Donald Trump's leadership, we may disagree with your views, but we will fight to defend your right to offer it in the public square, agree or disagree. Now, the good news is that I happen to think your democracies are substantially less brittle than many people apparently fear. And I really do believe that allowing our citizens to speak their mind will make them stronger still. Which, of course, brings us back to Munich, where the organizers of this very conference have banned lawmakers representing populist parties on both the left and the right from participating in these conversations. Now again, we don't have to agree with everything or anything that people say, but when people represent, when political leaders represent an important constituency, it is incumbent upon us to at least participate in dialogue with them.
This year, NATO's biggest military exercises were conducted without American boots on the ground. This just goes on to show that Trump is rewriting Washington's relationship with Europe. For decades, Europe relied on US military muscle to deter threats from the East. But as Trump signals a strategic shift, pushing Europe to shoulder its own security, an uneasy question looms over the continent. Can Europe truly defend itself without America? The war in Ukraine has shattered old assumptions about security. European nations, long complacent in their defense spending, choosing welfare over war preparedness, now face a sobering reality. The Baltic states and Poland have raced ahead, bolstering their defenses against the Russian threat. But major Western European nations are still reluctant to divert funds on defense and security spending. Trump has demanded NATO members commit 5% of their GDP to defense, up from the previous 2% benchmark, a level that many, including Germany, have barely met. In fact, British Army, once the backbone of European defense, has shrunk to its smallest size in centuries. Moreover, a Financial Times report claims that NATO states possess less than 5% of the necessary air defense capabilities. They are underprepared to protect Central and Eastern Europe from a large-scale Russian attack. Yet, while European leaders acknowledge the need to rearm, they remain constrained by their electorates. A YouGov poll found that only 30% of Britons support increasing defense spending, and even fewer support raising taxes for the military. In contrast, Russia under Putin's wartime economy has far more flexibility to expand its military budget. They fail to understand that while it may be the military who wins battles, it's economies that win wars. European Commission Chief Ursula von der Leyen has unveiled a Rearm Europe plan. The plan offers 150 billion euros in defense investment loans and relaxing EU deficit rules for military spending. But is it enough? The reality is clear. Europe must choose between prosperity and security. Some leaders have called for the formation of a true European army to replace NATO's dependence on the US. But can a continent that has relied on American firepower for 80 years suddenly defend itself? Some leaders argue that NATO, even without full American commitment, can still hold the line. Others believe the only solution is a new European military structure independent of Washington. But Europe doesn't have the luxury of time and debate. With Russia's war machine growing stronger and transatlantic ties growing weaker, Europe has no choice but to act. This is a test of leadership, resolve, and unity. Because make no mistake, the battlefield won't wait. Russia isn't slowing down, the world isn't growing safer. And America? It's looking inward, its gaze shifting away from the old continent. If not, NATO risks becoming little more than a paper shield. Europe's security can no longer be an American burden. The continent must rise or risk falling alone. If this is truly the European century, it won't be decided in conference rooms. It will be decided in the trenches, in the factories, and in the minds of those who want to fight back. Thank you for watching Statecraft.